Hi there, Greg Olnick here. This is a quick overview of some of the advanced techniques you can do in Excel. And so just a quick taste of some of the stuff that I cover in courses. So here we go. So this is a toolbox file that I store things that I learn how to do or need to teach other people, especially advanced users. So if I'm on a project and I have to do data cleansing and I figure out a way of cleansing data that's very efficient, I will create a sheet for that specific topic. So in case a couple of years later I need that skill, I can go there. And sometimes it's better than just going to Google to search. So you have like a library of the things that you use the most. So just a quick taste of them. So I'll just go into audits. Audits basically allows you to trace precedence. It's on the toolbar, the ribbon, sorry, called formulas. And you have things like trace precedence, dependence, and so on. So if I want to see where this cell is referred to, I would trace the dependence, and it shows the arrows. So if I want to go to this dotted arrow means it's not on the sheet, it's on another sheet. So if I double click the line, it takes me to the sheet or shows me the reference. So you can remove the lines, and the other contents or items is the idea of adding notes. So right click's the trick. You can right click and add a note, edit a note, delete a note. You can also insert comments. Comments are so you can direct them to someone's email address or within your company or exterior. So those are two different concepts. Another thing about auditing is you can do error checking. It basically takes you to any cell that has an error, and it helps you do some error checking and fixing up some of your errors. Next will take you to the next error and so on and so on. So pretty cool. There's trace precedence, so built that cell or formula, and trace dependence if that cell's used other places. That can be very handy. And the home button will take me back to the beginning. Amputate text is basically to remove, in this case, remove the letters after the number. So there's a custom function that a friend of mine, Brian Zorba, built. And nowadays in the new Excel, there's a tool built into Excel. It's the FlashFill. So as long as you have a couple cells of what you want, you just do Control E, and it would automatically populate the rest of the empty cells following the logic of what it assumes you're doing. So the function that Brian built is here, and now it's built into Excel. The and or, basically conditions that often use with ifs. So if I type 5, this one goes true and this one goes false, because this one says it has to be both greater than 5 and less than 25. And you can nest that inside if statements, so you can have it say things like yes or no to conditions. So this is basically, instead of saying true, false, it'll say what you want it to say or do what you want it to do with the if statement. Average or sum ifs basically allows you to do sum average, like if average. So this formula here, basically it's averaging only if the cell is the letter in that range is AA. So it's only averaging the numbers that are with the label AA. And this is sum if. So it's a little different than the standard sum. The camera tool is really cool. These are pictures from the camera, and you'll see that they're dynamic. If I change the numbers, you'll see it changes on the photograph. And the beauty of the graphic, it's you can move it around, you can rotate it, you can do whatever. So the camera tool is a tool you can add to your toolbar. Basically, you just highlight the data range that you want to take a picture of, then hit the camera icon, and then click where you want that picture to go. There it is. And home to take you back. Charts, basically, is just a sheet that talks about things about standard charts. So XY chart is obvious, but sometimes you want to interpolate blanks. So that just talks a bit about how to interpolate to make that the blank or empty or zero doesn't drop down to the x-axis. So just some examples of what you can do. Here's an example where it ignores NA. Some different ways of getting it to interpolate blanks. Code repeats is if you want to say, based on conditions, you want it to have a code. So the formula is in the second cell. It's just if C3, which is this cell, is comma D2 plus 1. So you're creating a unique code for the groups where it finds a match. Concatenate is when you want to add cells together with like text or so on. And you can use ampersand symbol to join, but you can concatenate lots of objects together. It's a little easier. Another thing that some people don't know, it's not concatenate, but it's kind of cool, that if you want a label that's actually word wrapping automatically, you just have to type the first word and then Alt Enter and then type the second line. So it's a way of getting two things in the same cell. And you can also do it with a formula that puts a hard return. Conditional formatting, it's used quite often for when like a number is greater than something or less than something. But you can also use with like a formula where if the length of the cell is greater than something, that's pretty simple too. It's all now based on under the main home ribbon under conditional formatting. There's lots of options that are basic, but you can also put your conditional formatting to apply to an entire row or a group of cells. Or you can apply the conditions met on a cell that it would format the entire column. So instead of manually formatting, it's very useful. It's another example of conditional formatting. This sheet here talks also about how to automate holidays with formulas so that you don't have to figure out the holiday dates every year. You can automate that. And then you can make your conditional formatting based on that range. So this is a range called stats. And so if any cell is equal to a stat holiday, it goes yellow. So that's the conditional formatting to automatically format stat holidays. Consolidation fields is just another way of consolidating using ampersand. So I should move that button next to the other one. Data entry techniques. One method is you can select a range of data and then give it a range name. So if I highlight a range, and I'm going to call this data underscore test, because you can't use spaces in range names, then hit enter, that range now has a name. So if I hit the drop down, you see you have a lot of range names, but I'll go data test, you see it highlights that range. And then I can type in words or numbers, and you'll see as I hit enter key, it goes automatically to the next column. And if you make a mistake, you can also do shift enter to go up. Like if I miss one, I can go up and then type. And then, so as you type it with the enter key, it goes to the next column automatically. The tab key would go horizontally. Again, you can do shift tab to back up. And as you get to the very last cell, it automatically goes to the first. Very useful data entry technique. Now you can also then, with right click, you can change the format of those cells so that they are unprotected. Then you protect the entire sheet. Just go format cells, protection, and you disable locking of those cells, and then you lock the whole sheet, and only those cells will be allowed to be edited. So different useful skills. And another thing is validation. So you can make it so only numbers under 100, or you can control not allowing decimal places and so on. So with validation rules, we'll cover that later. Data filter pivot tables. So if you have data, you want to make a pivot table to analyze the data, you just have to be in the data range and go to insert pivot table. And then it'll create a new sheet with that data. And it's pretty easy. It assumes your data, so you don't have any blank rows or columns. It's usually quite good. So when I hit OK, it's going to create a new sheet, and then I can build my pivot table. So what I want to analyze, I want to analyze the type of sales. So I drag that into the rows. Maybe I want to filter by year, so I put that in the filter. And what do I want to count? I want to count the actual sales values. So now it's doing a sum of sales. If I didn't wanted sum or wanted average, I can change the field settings. So that's basically just a simple, sum of all the sales by type. You can add the sales rep, say, as a columns. The reason why they call it pivot tables is you can put sales rep down here and type over here. You can pivot things around. Very useful. And it's an example of another pivot table. So as you click into pivot table, you see the pivot table tools. I'll go home. There's also Power Pivot, which allows you to analyze multiple sets of data together. Data Fix, this is just a whole bunch of formulas that I use in projects to clean data, like to trim, the trim removes spaces, and there's also clean to clean out weird symbols, like non-printing symbols. Length will give you the length of a cell, how many characters long. I use substitute, find and replace, all sorts of different tools to cleanse data. So there's just a bunch of them. And home. Date calculation, some people struggle with this because one thing they do is they use 365 for how many days in a year, and that's not accurate. Even 365.25 is still not accurate. It's not close enough for some leap years and so on. So there's different ways of calculating dates using the today function. There's you can take the integer of that so you know how many years. You can do math with dates. Date difference is a good formula. There's year fraction. That's a pretty useful function, year frac. And then you can do an integer of that and get how many years. So anyway, there's different things you can do with dates. Dropdowns, these kind of tools, or like these kind of dropdowns, you can get them to add to create your own form in Excel. These tools, you have to go to the developer ribbon. If you don't have it, you just right click, you can go and add it. And then they can insert these type of objects. So after I insert, I can then right click on the object and format it and tell it where I want the data to go, that when I make a choice, where I want the data to go. Cell link. So it's going to, in this case, it's going to D4. So what is it putting in D4? It's putting the word true or false. Are you available? True or false. So you can use that cell in formulas. So this basically uses that. If that cell is true, say great. Otherwise, it says too bad. That's what's in this cell. So as I check that, you'll see it changes another cell. You can drop down picks, and it puts the value here. And then this cell basically uses that value with an index in the list of cities. That's the drop down feeding that. This one is kind of interesting. Where with radio buttons, we call radio buttons, so only one choice applies. It's putting the value selected in here, in this cell, as a number, and then I could use that in if statements or switch statements to get the word to show up here. So this cell here has the formula using if. This cell here has the formula using switch. So there's other simpler ways to use dropdowns using a list. That's on the data ribbon. And when you make a list, you can make the list from a range that you've named, like equal cities, or you can use formulas. So in this case, basically this drop down here, if you pick like vegetables, then it's going to only show the list of vegetables in this drop down. So they make dependent drop downs. And the formula is using indirect. Another way of doing it is a bit more complicated, but it's for large lists of data. Like if you have a huge list of all the countries in all the regions and cities, it's a lot easier with a more fancy formula, but basically you pick, in this case, example is you pick manufacturer, and it only shows manufacturers within that collection. So what is the formula that built that? It's a little bit more complicated. I'll just give you a peek at it. So if I go to the list button here to see what is that formula. So it's using offset, it's using match, and it's using Countif. So it's using a variety of functions from the list of data that feeds these two dropdowns. And one thing later you'll see is that I'm using a function to be able to extract unique values from the list of manufacturers to feed this dropdown automatically. Just that alone could take at least a half hour to learn. Okay, so that was dropdowns. Dependent dropdowns, that's what we talked about. And this is the data that fed that manufacturer model number. And this is the formula. So when I pick the manufacturer here, it actually sends the data here. That formula is just the offset to bring the data here and to prove that it works. And then once you're happy with the formula that's working, then you can just copy that into the list box. Oh, by the way, this is a table of unique manufacturers driven by this. This is an array function. Error suppression. Sometimes you have errors that you don't want to show div 0 or value errors. So there's a couple of ways of doing it. The simple way now is if error. If error, that formula, then show nothing. That's open quotes, close quotes. So this will basically show the result if it's not an error. So if I say 25 divided by 0, can't do that, so it shows an error, but these cells suppress the error. So if I say divide by 3, then it shows the result instead. Fill blanks. You can use that new tool, the one called FlashFill. You just are, as long as you have a few cells that it can figure out what to fill, you just be in that range and go with the control key, control E, and it populates all the blank cells in that range by the assumption it made. So the way we used to have to do that was it listed here the different steps to select. You'd select the range, then control G, go to special. I still use this a lot for macros. Go to blanks, and then I want that cell to be equal to cell above. So I just say equal up arrow. And I want to fill all the selected cell. I just go control enter, and it fills it all with formulas. Then I just have to copy and paste on top as values. So I'm just going to undo that because I don't want to ruin my file. And home. Here's an example here too. You can try control E, see it fills in the blanks. Control Z, undo. Okay, back home, fill blanks. FlashFill, basically that's what that is, FlashFill demo. Find unique values in a list of data. There's a formula to do a Countif to find the unique values, so different ways of doing it. This just says if there's multiples, if this is found, this number 45 is in here more than once, it's going to say multiples. If it's only in there once, it'll say unique. Fix dates, just some ways of fixing dates. I like this one. When I export data from, say, SAP, and it's the wrong format for Excel or my Windows settings, then like it's day, month, year, when my Excel is month, day, year, sometimes I'll have to fix it. Like, especially if I export from my bank account, it puts the dates in the wrong format, so I have to cleanse it with a formula. Frequency, just an array function. Say the frequency of values between this and this. What is the frequency? 36%. 8% are there, and so on. So it's an array function, frequency. Hide unused. So if you want to hide unused columns or rows, like there's no values in April, and you don't want to have to manually hide stuff, you can have a macro to hide it based on cell content. So example, this will hide the columns that have zeros, have no data. This will show all again. This will hide rows that have no data, and this will show all again. So this is the macro code that makes that happen. HolidayCalcs, I mentioned that before. These are the holiday formulas. The only complicated one I got off the internet is this one to calculate Thanksgiving. This is Canada version. You have to Google for getting the US version, but it's very similar. So this basically explains how it's fetching the data to get that to be accurate. The if function, there's many uses of if. Like this basically says it's Countif, counting if there's an A or an F. So 1, 2, 3. Yeah. This is kind of like if you're making like an invoice system and you want to mark something paid. So you just have to put an X or a P in there, and it'll mark it paid and remove that from the total owing. So this cell here basically says if G6 is empty, put the value of F6, otherwise 0. This says if or, so if this cell's an X or a P, then put paid. This is an interesting one where I had to basically get from a list of people's names, I had to build up like what I want as the salutation. So if the couple don't have the same last name, then I wanted it to say, both names. But if they had the same last name, then I just want to say Mike and Jane Smith. So this is one way I did it using the formula. Indirect labels. So this is a bit weird, but if you want to label automatically say you're doing subtotals and the label's in the wrong place, you want it to be put somewhere like just the row above. So you can use indirect. So this is where the label would be. This is a cell, and this is where it is, say in a subtotal, but I want it on the same row as where the cell is. Then I use the formula indirect, and it brings the label up a row. That can be useful. Interpolating blanks, I mentioned that. I put it in charting. Leading zeros. Sometimes people want to, have a text formatting so it shows a leading zero. So that could be a format, custom format. That's one method. Loan calculator is just a little handy dandy loan calculator. I added also a proper case function in here to make the person's name proper case. This is just some formulas that we'll talk about later about proper case, uppercase. Macros, this is an example of how macros can help you. Macros are built from the developer ribbon, and you can record a new macro and then record your steps using range names and navigation with Control G and so on. And you can record it in an absolute or relative manner. So it's a bit complicated to explain that in this short video, but and create buttons and link to those macros. You can have keyboard shortcuts as well for your macros. They can be local within the file, or they can be global for use in any spreadsheet. So in this case, these are local macros. So if I want to add a new person, I click the add button. It does a bunch of things. It inserts a row and it copies down all the formulas. So if I add somebody like Adam, well, that's the last name. So I'll say Smith, Adam. Now, when I hit sort, it sorts the data range. And add more people and so on. So buttons, macro buttons can be very useful. All these things at home, that's a macro button that goes to the sheet. All these buttons are macro buttons. Name sheet tab basically is a macro code that you put into the sheet tab. So you just copy the subroutine, right? You just Control C that, right click the tab and edit the code on there. So when I've done that, anytime I can change this to say hello, and, as soon as I hit enter, you'll see it changes the sheet tab name. Oh, I make a warning here because if any macro that takes you to the sheet by the sheet name won't work now because I've renamed the sheet. So I'm going to do Control Z on that. So anyway, this is the code that you can copy this, right, select that, Control C, then you right click on the tab and put it into the macro of that tab. So now I go back home. Number formats, there's a bunch of different number formats. I just give a demo example of these. Random number generator. Sometimes you need that for projects. So if I want to randomize, the rand function basically creates random numbers. And why would you want that? Well, if I want to be able to organize people randomly, I can have the data range and then sort by those numbers. And every time I select that and sort, it will be random sorted because I'm sorting by those numbers. And I made a macro button that basically just selects the range and does a sort by column C. That's all that button does. So watch, every time I click it, you see the names are sorted in a random order because it's sorted by the random numbers. Repairing text, there's a variety of things you can do to trim or clean text. This is the trim function. Mid function, if you want to bring like something in the middle of a sentence, you want to extract. If it's consistent, if you want to extract 2 letters over, you can extract. Either right, left function or mid function. So the clean function removes these weird, anytime you have weird codes, like even spaces that aren't really spaces, the clean function will get rid of them. So these are weird characters, like character 15 and character 12. So if you combine the two, it'll remove leading spaces, multiple spaces between words, and spaces after the sentence, and trim off all the non-printing symbols. You can also use substitute to say, when you find this, change it to this or remove this. Later I'll show you an example of mass substitute. So anyway, we use these things to replace text, substitute text for different projects to clean data. Rounding numbers, you can round mround to nearest like 25 cents. You can use the mround. So I want to round that number to the nearest 25. There's regular round. There's round up. So you can round up to the nearest whatever. Round down to the nearest. Fixed amount of decimals, or truncate to remove decimals. You can do precision as displayed so that it will only use what is displayed. Searching for the asterisk symbol is difficult when you're doing a search for that symbol, so they can use formulas to do that, like the search function. So if I'm using the search function, I have to put these little squigglies in front of the symbols that are not normal characters that I'm looking for. Another way of doing that, instead of search, is the find function. It's a little better because you don't have to use the squigglies. So I can say find asterisk in cell D12. So this finds what location it's in. So it finds it's in the sixth character, 10th character, and so on. And if it can't find, like it can't find the double stars, then it'll say error because there's no double stars. So useful sometimes. Series. So the standard series, when you have January, you copy it down, it automatically cycles. That's obvious. The months of the year, the days of the week, in short form or long form, quarters of the year cycle, 1, 2, 3, 4, and anything with a number at the end, like a text with numbers at the end, automatically cycle also. And if you don't want it to cycle, like it normally will cycle, if you don't want it to cycle, just hold down the Control key. It'll do the opposite. If it's cycling and you don't want it to cycle, you hold down the Control key. If it's not cycling and you want it to cycle, you hold down the Control key.